Good morning, my students. Today we're going to be looking at Shakespeare's Sonnet 18, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of the sonnet, the meanings within it, and just basically a sort of explanation that you can use if you're going to write an essay on it for your English. Okay, so the first thing to begin with is just the question of what is a sonnet? A sonnet is a type of poem. I'm not going to go into too much detail here because there's other videos and resources and things that you can look at. But essentially, a sonnet is a structure of a poem which has 14 lines and it has a certain rhyme scheme. The original sonnet that Shakespeare based his sort of style on, and other English poets based their style on, is called the Petrarchan sonnet or the Italian sonnet, because it comes from Italy. Now, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail with this. You can watch sort of other, videos or look at other things if you want to look at exactly what the sonnet form is and all of that. But basically, all you need to know is that it has 14 lines and it has a certain rhyme scheme. For the English sonnet or the Shakespearean sonnet, sometimes called the Elizabethan sonnet, it has 14 lines. It has the A B A B C D C D E F E F and then G G at the end, which is basically referring to the rhyme scheme. In other words, A rhymes with this one here. Huh? So you have day, this would be like A. Okay, B would be this temperate, and then May again would be A. So this rhymes with this, and then the second one rhymes with this. Okay, just like that. A B A B C D C D E F E F. And in the last two lines, they rhyme with each other. This is called the volta or the turn. So long as men can give that can see and gives life to thee. Okay. All right. Now, the other thing, the more important thing for my explanation of this to you guys is to also just think about what is a sonnet. The way to think about a sonnet, okay, what a sonnet is, it comes from the Italian word sonetto, which means like little song, little song. The way I think about a sonnet is it's more like a little love song. You can imagine that a sonnet is sort of like what you might write to the person that you're deeply in love with, that you wanna. It's like, for example, you can imagine Shakespeare here saying this poem, saying this love poem as the other person is in his arms. And maybe it's nighttime, the stars are out, it's quiet, and they're looking at each other. And then Shakespeare begins his poem. He says, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" That's the way that you want to think about a sonnet. Okay, it's very intimate, it's very romantic, it's very personal. It's a little love song, like a little love note, like a little voice note of love. That's how you want to think about a sonnet. Okay, so let's begin. All right, so he opens with a question: "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" Thee is the old way of saying you. So what he's saying is, "Shall I compare you to a summer's day?" Again, imagine this as if he is holding the other person in his arms or they're laying down together. It's very intimate, and he's now turning to them and he's saying to them, "Shall I compare you to a summer's day?" This opening question is very effective in a number of ways. First, because it's a question, it draws the reader in immediately. Okay, because it's as if the poet is speaking to you directly, and you can feel the sort of romantic niceness of it. It's like he's saying the words to you directly, or they're saying the words directly to you. Shall I compare you to a summer's day? And obviously, the answer is going to be yes, please do. Tell me how amazing I am. And this method of starting a poem with a question is highly effective. I actually do it myself when I write my own poetry. A lot of the time, especially if I do like romantic poetry, starting with a question is highly effective to get the reader to be engaged with the poem. It's very different, for example, if he had started by saying, "You are like a summer's day," which is still effective to some extent because you'll be asking, "Why am I like a summer's day?" But it's not as effective, okay? Because you're not being asked a question. If you're asked a question, you are challenged or you are invited. That's a better way to think about it. You are invited to take part. Okay, so you're directly taking part. The other thing to notice about this opening line is that it's in present tense. In other words, he's saying right now, shall I compare you to a summer's day right now? It's not past tense, and it's not also talking about someone else. Okay, he's saying the, meaning you. It's very different if he had said, shall I compare her to a summer's day, or shall I compare them to a summer's day? So again, you feel completely that the speaker is speaking to you directly, which is again far more intimate, far more romantic, far more engaging than if the poem was to say, shall I compare her to a summer's day, and so on. Because that's something else to notice also, the pronoun use. You, in other words, the. And like I said, I also do this in my own poetry. It's funny when I write romantic poetry, I write it. And many poets do this, like a classic tradition that you write sort of, it's not based on an imaginary person, but it's what you call your muse, which is sort of like a collection of all of the, like for me, a collection of all the different sort of women that I've been in love with over the period of time, or like beautiful women that I've seen and talked to and things like that. It's like the spirit of the feminine, something like that, or the spirit of love or romance. That's who you write your poem to. It's like in Homer's epic, he begins by saying, "O Muse, sing of Achilles," and things like that. It's like a dedication to the spirit of poetry, the spirit of story, something like that. Okay, anyway, so it's very common. Anyway, so this sets the tone very nicely. It sets the tone very nicely. We're gonna have a romantic poem here, and it's gonna be sort of very romantic. He's gonna compare this person to a summer's day. Now, the word compare here in Shakespeare's time, it doesn't just mean, or we can think about this word compare in the way that we would understand normally that should I talk about you like you are, how you are similar to summer? Yeah, I'm gonna compliment you in some way. But there's also another way that we can understand compare, which is to say, should I measure the value and the beauty of summer against you? In other words, if I have a scale, should I put summer in one side of the scale and you in the other side of the scale and see what happens? So there's another way to look at this, which is not just about complimenting the person, like saying you're so beautiful, I can compare you to summer, but it's also let's weigh up the value of summer in terms of, almost spiritually or almost in terms of the deep value of summer and compare that to you. Okay, and let's see who comes out on top. That's like sort of another way to look at this. It's in there also. Okay. Now, why summer and not spring or not autumn or not winter? Because summer is the season of, you could say summer is the season of life. Summer is the season of brightness. It's when everything has its greatest amount of light, color, in a sense, beauty. It's spring, you can imagine, is like if you imagine summer, spring, winter, autumn to be like a love story, spring would be the beginning when the people are just looking at each other, maybe a word, maybe a look, a glance, but there's no connection yet. They're still sort of strangers to each other. But summer is when the connection has been made, and now you are fully in love. You're in the height of love. That's what summer is. Okay. And with a person, summer is like their youth. Okay. But it's not youth like a child. It's like after that. It's like when you're in the fullness of adulthood, you're at your peak of beauty, basically, aesthetically speaking. You're like most fertile, most attractive in terms of just pure romantic, intimate beauty. Okay. Autumn would be sort of maturity in terms of, you're beginning to now go from like your, I don't know, your adulthood to now you're going into sort of more older ages. You're like the trees in autumn. In autumn, the trees lose their leaves, things turn, you know, gold and things like that. You're going from sort of bright colors, bright fullness of life, which is like youth, to now in autumn, you're more like mature. You're like an older adult. Okay, you're not really in the phase of romance and things like that. You're now in the phase of sort of, I don't know, raising your children or something like that. Hmm. And then winter obviously is sort of the end of things. Winter is like the end of love or like the end of life and things like that. Okay. So we're in the season, we're in the peak, basically. That's what he's referring to. So he's gonna take nature's peak, the peak of its life and everything else, and he's gonna compare it to his person that he's in love with. Okay. And he begins by saying, Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Means you are more lovely means beautiful, and more temperate means two things. One, temperate has a meaning which is like balanced, like you are perfectly balanced. Like your eyes, your hair, your face, your skin, everything is perfectly balanced. It all matches together perfectly. Like you are more perfect than nature. You are more perfectly put together than nature herself. Like nature has more imperfections than you do. That's what he's saying. Okay, which is yes, an amazing sort of compliment to receive. It's like your everything about you is perfectly balanced. Okay. And then interestingly enough, um, there's a lot of people who believe that what human beings find to be attractive. I've heard this before. I don't know if it's 100% true, but it's interesting to bring up. What human beings find attractive, just physically speaking, is symmetry. Symmetry. So people who have very symmetrical faces, things like this, they are deemed to be more attractive on average. Again, I wouldn't buy too much into this. It's just what I've heard. I wouldn't now start judging yourself based on this because often people can be extremely attractive if they're actually not fully symmetrical because they look more unique. Okay, anyway, so everyone is beautiful in their own way, so don't start now asking yourself about yourself. Don't worry about that. Okay, anyway, so that's just sort of one thing. You're like everything about you is beautiful. Like your eyes match your face, match your skin, match your hair, match your hands, match your voice. Everything about you is perfectly balanced. Everything about you is gorgeous. That's what he's saying. More temperate. Now, there's another meaning to temperate, okay, which is not the aesthetic meaning, but it's a reference to ethics or virtue ethics to be specific. And this is the virtue of temperance. There's a virtue which is called temperance, which means to do things without going to extreme. That's temperance. Example, if you eat 3 meals a day, you're probably going to be full and you're probably going to be healthy, right? 3 meals a day. Now, this would be like sort of the good middle space. Okay, if you eat 1 meal a day, you're probably going to be going hungry a lot of the time and you're not going to be so healthy. If you eat 10 meals a day, again, you're probably going to be overfilled and not so healthy. You see? So this is the idea of temperance, is doing things without going to extremes. And this applies to all other virtues. Aristotle says that virtue itself lies in the middle. The virtue of things lies in the middle. In other words, take like something like courage, for example, being brave. So there's being brave, okay, and then there's being a coward, and then there's being reckless. Example, example. There is a child on the edge of the roof of a high building. Okay, the child's gonna fall. Courage means you run and you save the child, risking your own self falling. This is courage. Cowardice is you ignore the situation and you walk away because you're afraid that you might die yourself. That's cowardice. Recklessness is there is no child, there is no danger, no one needs to be saved, but you run on the roof anyway, just because you want to prove that you're brave. That's reckless, right? Because you could die for no good reason. That's reckless. So this is the idea of temperance. So what he's saying is not only are you perfectly balanced in every way, not only are you amazingly gorgeous in every way, even more so than summer and nature herself, but you are also more ethically or more spiritually valuable than nature herself. He's basically saying like the goodness of you is greater than the goodness of the world itself. Okay, so he's giving the person a double quality, external goodness and internal goodness. Okay, now he goes on, and also it's worth mentioning just very quickly. There's another very famous um, English story which is called the Fairy Queen, Faerie, and then Queen has an E on it also, Fairy Queen, and one of the central themes in that story is from the 1400s, before Shakespeare, about 200 years before Shakespeare, is the theme of temperance. Temperance. I think it's written by Spencer. I can't remember exactly, but anyway, it's just interesting. All right. Anyway, so he goes on to say, rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. Okay. So rough means like what you would think it means. Okay, it just means strong, intense, violent. And then obviously winds is just winds. And then this is obviously understood. Now, darling and buds, darling obviously means like precious, um, precious, valuable, you know, beautiful, things like that. And buds is means like the bud of like a flower, the bud of like a flower, like the beginning of life. So what he's saying is in summer, in May specifically, the weather can be rough. And we know this, like if you're in the UK, the wind in May is quite rough at times. And he's saying that, like, he's now basically pointing out the different imperfections of nature compared to the person that he's talking to. So what he's doing is he's saying, look, you're so perfect, you're so amazing, you're so gorgeous and valuable and spiritually amazing that nature has imperfections which you don't have. I can point out things in nature that are imperfect where I can't do that like with you. Like you don't have these imperfections. That's what he's saying. So the darling buds of May is saying that the wind will shake the flowers, it will shake the grass and the trees and things like that, the plants. And some of them obviously will get ruined, some of them will die because the wind can be so rough in summertime. Okay. So he's saying, look here, you're winning, against summer. You're more beautiful than summer and better than summer, basically. Also, in a way, what he's doing here is he's introducing the idea that beauty has impermanence. Beauty has impermanence, meaning beauty has an end to it. So beautiful things die. That's why he's die at some time. That's what he's introducing here as well. Okay, because these darling buds are like a flowers and they're getting attacked already. Okay, they're getting attacked. And he's gonna start building on this idea that beauty has an end date, that beautiful things come to an end. He's gonna start building on it. Okay, and then he's building on this because at the end he's gonna make a turn. He's gonna make his flourish, his final sort of thing, which is like the punchline, I guess you could say, of the poem. The final sort of knockout punch of romance, the final love letter of romance, which he's going to give at the end in the volta, in the turn. So he says, and summer's lease hath all too short a day. It means, and summertime, lease is like when you rent a house from somewhere, or like rent a flat from someone. That's lease. Okay, you can live here for a little while and then you need to leave. You don't own it. You don't own the house or own the thing, whatever that you're leasing. You just live there or have possession of it for a little while and then it's gone. So basically he's saying, look, summertime is extremely short. Summer is short. So even though it's so beautiful, it's so amazing, it's so gorgeous, it's perfect, it's short. It's not perfect, but it's amazing. It's near perfect, but it's short. It's gone. So now he's saying, look, here's another thing that you are greater than summer. But now obviously the question for the listener is, well, I'm not gonna live forever, obviously, right? My beauty is gonna fade eventually when I get older. So what's how am I better than summer? And summer will be here, summer's come and go, but like my summertime is gonna be gone, right? When I die, basically, right? Even if I'm still beautiful, and you can still obviously be beautiful as you're older, obviously, even if the form of beauty changes, but you could obviously think, if we're human, then eventually we're not going to be here, right? For anyone to see our beauty, and our beauty won't be here, right? Because we'll be gone, we'll be dead. So how can I actually be better than nature or summer, right? He's going to answer this question. So he continues, sometimes too hot, the eye of heaven shines. He's talking about the sun here, obviously. Eye of heaven is the sun. You could also, in one sense, see the eye of heaven to be talking about like the eye of God. That's another way to look at the eye of God. And so, you could read this line in a sort of blasphemous sense, in that he's saying, potentially, if you read this in a sort of blasphemous sense, blasphemy means like speaking in a way which is not proper about God, or like godly things, something like that. That's like blasphemy, right? So you could read this in one blasphemous sense, because the eye of heaven is often a reference to God. Excuse me, not just in British culture, but in cultures predating, you know, Shakespeare by a lot. Like the Egyptians often, I believe, they talk about Horus and Ra. They talk about Ra as the eye of heaven, if I'm not wrong. In any case, it's a very classic allusion to God or the gods, and here also the sun, which is also often packed into that symbolism. But anyway, so the blasphemous sort of analysis you could take of this is that he's saying that you are so beautiful that you are even, again, this is blasphemy, yeah, big blasphemy. In a sense, you are like divine. You are even more beautiful than the gods. You are even more beautiful than the gods. That's like the blasphemous sort of take. That you are even more perfect, more beautiful than the gods themselves. You are like perfect, beyond perfection. Now he goes on to say, if you don't take the blasphemous angle, and you just take what he's saying about the sun, he's saying that the sun can be too hot. The sun is life-giving, the sun is amazing and all that, but you're more beautiful than the sun. That would be like the non-blasphemous sort of analysis. Okay, anyway, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. So this is a continued metaphor of the sun. Often is his gold complexion dimmed. He's saying basically like the sun, as amazing as the sun is, that it's life-giving. And the sun is a very classic symbol in poetry and literature. And it's been a symbol in poetry and literature for at least 10,000 years, probably more. Because obviously we as human beings have a very intimate relationship with the sun. I could speak about this for a long time, but the sun is a lot of our culture, the way we set up our society, our religions, even our ideas about ourselves and life, and our routines and rituals, even our politics. A lot of it revolves around the sun. And specifically for us, the fact that we became agriculturalists, meaning that we started farming our food as opposed to hunting it around 10,000 years ago. And so we developed an extremely intimate relationship with the sun, because we need the sun obviously to have life. Yeah, if there's no sun, there's no crops, there's no food, everyone dies. And so this is when we started tracking the seasons of the sun, the movement of the sun. We started to revolve our time, our day around the sun. We started to track seasons, as I said, and we had rituals. For example, this is why we have Easter, why we have it's called Easter in modern times, but throughout history it's been called the Spring Festival. Why we had what we call Halloween now, but in the past it was called I forget the name, some equinox. I don't know if you call it winter equinox or something, but anyway, there was a festival there, and also why we why we have throughout history the ideas of Son God and then the Son of God, which is what you call Christ. Um, because the Son was necessary. The most classic story, I'll tell you this and I'll move on. The most classic story in modern history, and I mean in the last 10,000 years, the story which has been told over and over again is basically that the Son is God, or the Son of God is told different ways sometimes. Anyway, the Son is a God. It's a life-giving God. It gives the world what it needs to live and survive. The Son is often described as like a a male figure. So he's like heroic. Some cultures, this is like Ra or Horus or Baal or um, Zeus. Um, as I said, Jesus Christ would also fit into this. In any case, the Son is often male and a god, divine in some way. He gives life to the world and then he dies. Okay, he's killed by his either brother or sometimes it's just an evil force. This would be our modern Satan. In the past, this would be Set, who killed his brother. I forget the brother. I don't know if it's Osiris. It might be Osiris in Egypt. With Baal, he also had, there was another god. I don't know if it's Tamat or something. I forget the names exactly, but anyway, with Zeus, this would be like Hades. Anyway, so the brother comes along, or the in the Lion King also, this is Scar with Mufasa. The evil god, basically, the god of death, comes along and he kills the sun god. He sends him to the underworld. This would be in terms of the year. This would be winter time. This is what winter is. Okay, this is how our ancestors saw winter, that the sun god has been killed. He's gone to the underworld. Now they do different rituals around here. This is why also we have things like Christmas, why we have like I said, Halloween, different festivals. They would do different festivals, they do sacrifices of animals and sometimes of humans. Although it's disputed in my own research whether the human sacrifice was done actually killing people or it was just that the people had died with disease or childbirth or something. Anyway, so this is winter time. They believe that the god is in the underworld and they need him to come back because if he doesn't come back, the world ends. Okay, because remember they didn't know that. If you imagine they didn't have calendars and technology and stuff, and they thought if the sun's gone, it's winter. They don't know if it's gonna come back, right? Anyway, so eventually they pray and do things like this, and they do the rituals and festivals and all that, and then eventually the sun comes back in springtime around Easter, comes back to its fullness, which is why we celebrate, right? It's why we celebrate spring festivals and things like that, festivals of life. So in any case, the sun, okay, was always highly, very much, for, at least for the last 10,000 years, very much intimately woven into our minds, our cultures, our ideas about life and everything else. Okay. Excuse me. So I say all that to say that he's saying that you are more to the person he's speaking to. You are more beautiful than all of that. You are more gorgeous than all of that. Despite the sun doing all of that for us, you are more beautiful and gorgeous and perfect than all of that. Okay. And he's saying that the sun, gold complexion dimmed, means that even the sun, as great and powerful as it is, oftentimes it gets hidden behind a cloud. Sometimes it's not as strong in the sky, things like that. Okay. Excuse me. Now, just to wrap up what I said, I'm gonna go put this on because I don't want you guys to get confused and now start questioning your faith and having a panic attack. Just because the thing is present in nature, like the rotation of the sun, it has seasons and things like that, it doesn't mean that the stories are not true. Okay? It doesn't mean that God is not real or having faith is not real, things like this. Okay, you need to make your thinking more complex. Don't think simply. Okay, simple thinking is, ABC. Don't think ABC. The universe is far more mysterious than we can ever understand. Okay, so have faith, believe in God. If you want to be religious, practice your religion. If you want to believe in Christ, believe in Christ. Whatever your faith is, follow that. No problem. If you want to be philosophical, be a philosopher, but God is real. That's what I can say. Okay, at the bottom of everything and at the top of everything, indeed, you will see the mystery of the infinite, which is what we call God. Okay, so don't now become atheist, or don't now become confused or existentially lost. Think more complex. Okay, don't be simple in your thinking. Okay, anyway, and every fair from fair sometimes declines, sometime declines. What he's saying basically here is that every beautiful thing, fair here means beautiful. Every beautiful thing sometime declines, has a time when it's going to end. Like I said before, he's continuing the idea that every beautiful thing dies eventually. And also, he's continuing the virtue symbolism. Fair is reference to the virtue of justice, like we would say today, justice or equality. He's saying that even the most equal, the most fair, the most amazing things, they die eventually. Okay, even though that they're perfectly just and all that, eventually they fade, they die. With the reference obviously here being you won't die. But again, the listener is going to be thinking, how will I not die, right? I'm not immortal. How can I not die? I'm going to die, obviously, right? So even if I'm perfect, all these things you're saying to me, how can I not die? By chance or nature's changing course, untrimmed. Okay, so he's saying here, like again, every beautiful thing it dies either by chance, just because something happens to it, or by nature's changing course, or just because the virtue of nature itself, which is always changing. Spring moves into summer, moves into autumn, moves into winter, and again, things live, they grow up, they die, something else comes along. Like this is nature is always changing. This is a classic reference to again classic philosophy. In reading this and also reading a lot of Shakespeare's other stuff, you really have to call him a philosopher as well as a playwright. He is one of the greatest. He's one of the greatest minds, no doubt, humanity has ever produced. You can't just call him a playwright because his understanding of philosophy plus his own philosophy is very deep. Okay, this is also a reference to a classic philosophical idea. Um, I think it's Heraclitus. I think that's his name. Heraclitus. I think he was Greek. I don't know exactly. Anyway, he's an old philosopher, it's like 2,000 years ago, and he's got a very famous quote. He says that no man ever steps in the same river twice. This is a famous quote. No man ever steps in the same river twice, because he is not the same man, and it is not the same river. Because everything is always changing. That's his idea. Everything's always changing. I believe Buddha said this. I might be wrong about the attribution. Anyway, one great philosopher in the East, I believe it's Buddha, he says that change is the only constant. Change is the only constant. So many philosophers have talked about this idea. Everything's always changing all the time. And the only constant really that you can control is your actions, your virtue, your goodness. Okay, everything else will change, regardless of how much you don't want it to. Which is why you want to focus on your soul and your heart and make sure that you have a good one. Okay, untrimmed here. This is a naval or a naval seafaring type of word. It basically means when the boat loses control. Okay, when the boat loses control, it means that nature is always changing and you can't control it. Okay, you can't stop the water from changing. You can't stop anything from changing except your own, virtue, your own actions, your own goodness, basically. Everything else is going to change. Your hair is going to change, your skin, everything else is going to change. So he's saying that, look, as great as summer is, as great as the sun is, as great as beautiful things are in nature, they all change. So again, the listener is going to be thinking, well, obviously all this applies to me too, right? I'm going to change, right? Obviously, I'm going to change. If the trees and everything change, why won't I change? And here now, he's going to make his sort of adjustment. Okay, he's going to make his adjustment. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes. Okay. Another thing that you should know about the sonnet form is it's divided into 8 lines and then six. 6 and 6. Yeah, 8 lines and then six. The 8 lines begin the subject. Okay, begin the topic. Like all of this is about how summer is not as beautiful as you are because summer is imperfect in some ways. It's going to die in some ways, things like that. Huh? Nature itself is not even as perfect as you are, and nature is going to die in some way. It begins the subject. The next six lines change the thing that you're talking about in a sense. So now he's going to shift from talking about nature to now talking about the person that he's speaking to his love. Okay, you can also think about it. It changes what is being addressed, like the topic of reflection or conversation. All of this is about nature, about summer. That's these 8 lines here. The next 6 are going to be about the person that he's talking to. Okay, so remember all this time he's been saying, look, nature's gonna change, the beauty of nature dies, summer dies, you know, its beauty never lasts. And all this time the person is thinking, well, what about me? Like, obviously I'm gonna fade too, right? My beauty's gonna go too. And they might be thinking, well, if my beauty fades, will you stop loving me? You know, all these things are like that, right? So I'm gonna die too, things like that. But now he's gonna address this question directly. And he opens these next 6 lines. It's called the sestet. That's what this is called. The ones before, I believe, is called the oc. I don't know if it's an octet or octave or something. I don't know. I forget the technical term. But I know this is called the sestet. It's like the 6 lines after the 8. Anyway, he begins now. He says, "But thy eternal summer shall not fade." So he directly addresses the person that he's speaking to. He says, "But thy" means but your, eternal means ever living, infinite, never dying, summer shall not fade. Directly saying, look, the answer to your question is no, you're not going to die ever. And your beauty also is not going to die ever. Wow, that's like a big thing. It's like a big statement. It's like, no, you're going to live forever, and your beauty also is going to live forever. Now, obviously, the person's thinking, well, how? That's not possible, right? How? How? But Shakespeare's not going to stop here. And it's also, you can think there's a combination of words here, which, they add to the punch of the line. Like the line, he didn't have to. There's also something else within the line, which is the rhythm of the line is what's called iambic pentameter. In other words, it's the way that the lines sound. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Do you see it's like a tata, 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 tata. That's called iambic pentameter. Tata, tata. They're all like this. By chance or nature's changing course, untrimmed. Tata, 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 like a dancer. That's the rhythm in the line. So besides the rhythm requirement for the structure of the poem, the line itself could have been perfect. He didn't have to write eternal, he could have used another word. He could have said, but thy perfect summer shall not fade. That would have been fine. He could have said, but thy lovely summer shall not fade. That would have been fine. By choosing eternal, it's like he's guaranteeing, he's like double locking, or he's like, he's saying for sure. Because summer shall not fade would have been enough to say, like, your summer is not going to die. You're going to live forever. That would have been enough to capture the idea. But the fact that he adds an eternal, it's just like adding to the guarantee of what he's saying. He's saying to the person, you will never die. I swear you will never die. And your beauty also will never die. Now he's not gonna stop there, but he's gonna keep going, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Okay, so this one is again adding to what he's just said, nor lose possession. You're not gonna ever lose. Possession means ownership. You're never gonna lose of that fair, that beauty thou owest, that you have, that you own. So your looks are not gonna fade. Okay, your eternal summer is not gonna fade. It means your eternal beauty and life is not gonna fade. You're gonna live forever. And your looks are not gonna fade. And again, fair, we mentioned the virtue of justice and fairness and balance, things like that. And your goodness is not gonna fade, as well as your beauty is not gonna fade. Nor shall death brag. Now he's personifying death. Thou means you wander around in his shade. Okay, death is not going to touch you. That's what he's saying. Death will never touch you. Reference here too, also biblical reference. The valley of the shadow of death. It's biblical reference. He's saying that you will never walk in this valley. You will never also walk in the like. There's another idea here that death or the underworld is a dark place, like hell or Hades or the underworld is underneath somewhere, which is why we say it's a shade. And it's a dark place. Shade means like shade of a shadow, dark. Like in the old stories, people used to believe that when you die, you go to the underworld and there's a boatman there. It's called Sharon, and you need to give him a coin. And if you give him a coin, he'll let you in his boat and then he'll take you across the river Styx to the other side. If you don't have a coin, it's GG. So our ancestors used to bury people with coins on their. I think they put a coin in their mouth. That's why if you've seen old films, or if you've seen films about the old people, they'll put a coin in the person's mouth before they bury them. That's what that's for. It's for the boatman called Sharon. Sharon or Sharon. Okay, anyway, so he's saying, look, death is never gonna touch you. Death will never even touch you. He can't brag. He can't say, I've got you. So Shakespeare is saying, I'm not even gonna let that death touch you. He's never even gonna be able to brag that he's got you in his collection of people that he's taken, that he's killed. You're gonna live forever. I'm gonna protect you. And now we come to the we come to the sort of ending of the poem. When in eternal lines to time thou growest. Because all throughout this time, the person who's listening has probably been thinking, how in the world is this going to happen? Right? You're saying that I'm going to live forever. My beauty is going to live forever. My goodness is going to live forever. You called me more beautiful than the gods. You've said I'm more perfect than the gods. That I'm more perfect in the summer than nature. Nature is imperfect compared to me. How in the world are you going to do this? How can you do this? What magic are you going to use? And here is his answer to that question. When in eternal lines to time thou growest, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. This is his answer to the person. So when in eternal lines to time thou growest, his lines means his poetry. Eternal lines. So he says that his poetry is going to live forever. Confidence. Confidence and romance. And he was right. People will never forget about Shakespeare. This poem is like 500 years old. It's 500 years old, this poem. So people are never going to forget about Shakespeare. They're still reading his lines. Eternal lines. To time thou growest means I'm going to capture you, and he's done it in this poem, right? I've captured you in my poem. Thou growest means you live in my poem. Your spirit, you live in my poetry, in the lines of my poetry, which are eternal. And so, as long as men breathe, as long as there are people, or eyes can see, as long as even nature or the gods can see, they can see my poetry, or men can see my poetry, as long as anything can see my poetry, then this poetry will live forever. And you will live forever inside of it. It gives life to thee, it gives life to you. Wow. So as long as this poem is alive, the person that he wrote it to, who he said it to, who he spoke it to, is alive inside of it. And he was correct, obviously, because we're still reading it to this day. It's pretty amazing. Very romantic. Very romantic. Yeah, you could peep some game off of Shakespeare for real, yeah, if you want to talk about romance. Saying if you got a little fine thing, you want to drop some poetry on her. You know what I'm saying? Drop some game like this, you know what I'm saying? Bruh, she's gonna be in love with you for real, you know what I'm saying? Just say, baby girl, as long as this poem is alive. You'll be alive inside of it. Yeah. Yeah, that's a big recommendation to all you boys out there. If you want to be real romantic, if you want to get a girl to really fall in love with you, that you love, I don't obviously be manipulative now. All right, chill out. But you have a girl that you like a lot, and and she likes you, and you really want to do something for her, which is gonna be bigger than any present or handbag or money or something. Learn how to write poetry and speak it to her. Speak it to her. Look her in the eye. Right. She's gonna melt for you. Real talk. Do I say that from experience? Maybe. All right. Anyway, there's the poem. Okay, Sonnet 18, one of the most famous poems of all time, rightly so. Poem about love, obviously, immortality through art, immortality through poetry, through love, in a sense. His love for the other person is so strong that he crafts art based on it, i.e., poetry based on it, and the art itself becomes immortal. In a sense, the love for the other person gives immortality to the art that is created based on it. Okay, it's like the ultimate kind of dedication and love letter. You can think about it that way. Yeah. In all, a great poem, obviously. It's worldwide famous. People say it to each other all the time. I recommend that you read this other poetry also. And I hope that this helps you, in terms of writing your essays, but also just in terms of, your understanding in general education. Okay, my students, much love. Take care. God bless.